right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark LeGrand. I head up the sales efforts at Quigley Transportation. On behalf of Brett and our entire team, I'd like to say thank you to start out for taking the time to join us this afternoon. For hopefully you'll find an educational overview of the DQ file requirements. Majority of our time today, 99.9% of it is going to be educational. I'm in sales. It's not going to be selling. We certainly have programs available. Brett will touch on a couple of those. Last month, we did hours of service requirements and ELD monitoring. If you weren't able to join us last month and you would like that slide deck, it's a similar flow and format of what you'll see today. Feel free to reach out to me and I'll send that to you. Everybody that's registered for the webinar today will get a copy of this slide deck. It's fairly inclusive with all the details and requirements as far as what you need to have in each of the files. And we also have time slotted at the end for any questions you may have. Several of you have actually emailed us in advance a couple items you'd like us to cover. We'll certainly address those as we go through. And in a nutshell, why we picked this particular topic in hours of service last month, those are the two biggest areas that people approach us to have a conversation about. And as a matter of fact, a couple of our customers have said, using their words, is that we're in the pain relief business. Relieving them the pain of an audit, pain of a conditional rating, or pain of administrative burdens are typically the type of areas that we get approached to have discussions about. So with that, I'm going to step back. I'd like to introduce Brett Quigley, our founder and president of Quigley Transportation. He's going to guide us through today's slide deck. It'll be as detailed as you'd like it to be. And then as we go through, feel free to present any questions to Brett, and we'll cover those at the conclusion of the slide deck. And then again, those that have emailed in the questions in advance, I will go through those as time allows also. So thank you all again for joining us, and I'd like to hand it over to Brett now.
Thanks, Mark. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to give a little bit of background on myself as well as Quigley Transportation Management Solutions. So I've got about 40 years of experience in the transportation industry, managing 3 of the nation's largest 100 private fleets. Earlier last year, I embarked on a venture to start Quigley Transportation Management Solutions, where I reached out and handpicked a team of consultants based upon their knowledge and proven abilities. And our ultimate goal is to assist smaller carriers in reducing their transportation costs while improving their overall compliance and reducing their liability risk. As Mark mentioned, we're in the pain relief business, and whether that be pain associated with administering the various programs associated with DOT and fleet management, or it could be financial pain. So some of our customers have experienced that through having to hire more people to administer all the programs associated with DOT compliance. Others have had to face paying fines through DOT audits, and pretty significant fines at that. And then others have experienced a loss of revenue by as much as 40% by getting a conditional rating as a result of a DOT audit. So those are some things that we've helped them correct, and we can do the same for your company as well. We offer consulting services, but we also offer a wide range of services related to transportation management, DOT compliance, things of that nature that we can tailor to your specific needs. So with that, we will get into the meat of the content for today. And I'm going to stop my video here so you don't have to look at my face throughout the presentation. So as Mark mentioned, this material is going to be available at the end of our webinar. Make it available for anybody that registers and would like a copy of it. The information that you're going to see here throughout these slides is a lot more detailed than what I'm going to go through and talk to each of the slides. And I did that specifically for a point of reference that you can refer back to these slides if you may have questions later on that you want answered. So as we get to, if you think about questions throughout, certainly raise those questions. Excuse me, or you can raise those at the Q&A session. If you happen to think of a question after the webinar is over, feel free to email Mark or myself, and we'll be glad to get back to you with the answers on those. So as far as the agenda today, I'm going to go through and talk a little bit about general qualification for drivers, the driver qualification files and how that relates to the CSA and driver fitness category. A little bit about statistics related to driver qualification files and driver fitness. Red flag violations. So some of you may or may not know and be familiar with red flag violations. We'll talk a little bit about those. Driver qualification files and what is required with the it to be in the driver qualification files. And then also the monitoring of those documents once you have your driver qualification file completed. And then, as we mentioned, a final Q&A session. Okay, so the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations require that a motor carrier complete and maintain a driver qualification file on each driver that's subject to operating a commercial motor vehicle as defined in Part 390.5 of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations upon hire and then 3 years after termination of employment. So for those of you that don't have Part 390.5 memorized, essentially what that is, and I'm not going to read in detail what the definition is, but essentially, and I'm going to be focused on federal regulations today as it relates to property carrying vehicles. So there's passenger carrying vehicle regulations as well that we can certainly assist anyone with that's in that industry. But for today's webinar, I'm going to focus on the property carrying piece. So essentially, it's any vehicle that is over 10,000 pounds gross vehicle weight rating, actual gross vehicle weight, gross combination weight, or is used to transport hazardous material that require placarding. Now, the big thing here that I want to stress is that this can include CDL drivers as well as non-CDL drivers. So a common mistake that a lot of carriers make is that they associate the CDL with the driver qualification file, and that's just a fraction of the drivers that the driver qualification files encompass. So there are 8 main categories of compliance that any commercial motor vehicle driver must meet to operate a CMV in interstate commerce. So the first being they have to be a minimum age of 21 years of age. They have to speak and read and converse the English language. If you have a driver applicant that cannot fill out the application because they don't understand English, my recommendation is that you consider passing on that applicant, because more than likely that person is only going to cause you problems in roadside inspections and DOT audits down the road. Third point is operation. So the fact that they can safely operate the type of CMV that you are going to assign to them, and demonstrate the skills to do so. So have they passed a road test to demonstrate those skills? Are they licensed? Do they currently have a valid commercial motor vehicle operator's license issued by only one state? Again, notice that I said commercial vehicle operator's license and not CDL, because it can be CDL or non-CDL. On the violation side, they have to provide you at the time of application a list of violations for the preceding 3 years that they've had. Also, ensure that they're qualified to drive under the rules of Part 391.15. And then finally, be physically qualified to drive per DOT regulations. Every motor carrier should be monitoring their CSA data on a monthly basis. If you're not and you need assistance with that, that's certainly an area that we can assist with. CSA data is divided into 7 categories called basics. So driver fitness is just one of those 7 categories or basics. I'll be presenting more on this topic next month, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Violations of the driver fitness basic are closely aligned with the driver qualification file compliance. So some examples of violations are failing to have a valid and appropriate commercial driver's license, or being medically unqualified to operate a CMV. While not as frequent as the hours of service and vehicle maintenance violations, certainly at the roadside inspection, driver fitness violations account for 13% of all roadside inspection violations and 17% of all out of service violations in fiscal year 2021, according to FMCSA data. On the DOT audit front, for the same period, we're seeing violations for this category averaging over $6,000, where DOT has collected over $250,000 or almost $250,000, or 10% of all assessments. On the litigation front, certainly DOT compliance is a major concern, but from a litigation standpoint, this is where I get more nervous. And I can tell you from experience, I've been involved with several lawsuits as a result of injury as well as fatality accidents in my career. And the 2 things that a plaintiff attorney will subpoena quicker than anything are hours of service records and driver qualification files. And really what they're looking for are examples of where a carrier has failed to properly screen driver applicants, where they can then pursue gross negligent claims against that carrier for whether it be negligent hiring, negligent entrustment, or negligent retention. So certainly an area that is close to my heart. It's very costly to defend and very painful at the same time. A red flag violation. So red flag violations, and those are listed off to the right here. There's 16 of them. As you can see, 12 of those are related to driver fitness. And essentially what red flag violations are violations that the FMCSA has determined to be egregious violations of the regulations by drivers. And what this means in a DOT audit is that when an auditor comes in to do an audit on a carrier, they are required typically to audit a percentage of the drivers within that carrier's control. Well, any drivers with red flag violations are in addition to those drivers that are chosen for the random sampling. So it can increase the number of drivers that are being audited for your DOT audit. As far as driver qualification files, one thing that I can share with you, so the companies that I've went into to oversee their DOT compliance programs, and without exception, one of the first things that I've done is looked at their driver qualification files, performed audits on those, and without exception, I have yet to find a single driver qualification file that is 100% compliant for the DOT regulations. Now, what I've done in those cases is put programs and processes in place to bring them into compliance within a relatively short period of time, and then monitor those so that at any given time, I know exactly what the percentage of compliance for my driver qualification files are. So if you don't have that type of program in place today, I highly encourage you to put a program in place or look to a third party to outsource that to, such as Quigley TMS. Okay, on the driver qualification file, the regulation, while it allows that you can combine the driver qualification file and the personnel file for a driver, I highly recommend that you keep those as separate files. There's no reason why you want to give an auditor visibility to any documentation other than what is required. Now, with that said, Here's a list of required documents for the driver qualification file. Now, the last three on this list, by regulations, aren't required to be in the file, but I do recommend that you include these. Okay, the employment application. So every applicant must complete a DOT compliant application form. As part of our driver qualification file program, you'll receive a catalog of customized forms with your company information and logo at no additional cost, if that's something you might be interested in. The information that's contained in the application must include the name and address of the employing motor carrier, the applicant's name, address, date of birth, and social security number, 3 years of residency for the applicant, the date on which the application is being submitted, and then a list of any driver's licenses that were held within the last 3 years by the applicant. They also need to provide a kind of summary of the driving experience, showing the type of vehicles driven, the dates in which they drove those vehicles, and also an approximate distance traveled for each type. They also need to provide a list of accidents within the last 3 years. Now, these accidents would include any accidents involving while driving a commercial motor vehicle or a passenger vehicle. At the same time, they need to provide a list of any violations for the last 3 years. Again, commercial motor vehicle and passenger vehicles apply. They also need to provide the details behind any denial, revocation, or license suspension that they've had. They also need to provide information on previous employers that they've had for the prior 3 years. As well, if they've had any gaps of employment for greater than 30 days, these gaps must be explained on the application. The information that they also need to show the dates that they were employed by the previous employer, as well as the reason why they left that previous employer's employment. They also need to indicate, for those drivers that were hired after October 29th, 2004, they need to indicate whether or not they were subject to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations for each employer. Also, if they were subject to the drug and alcohol testing. So, in other words, did they operate any vehicles requiring a CDL license? Also, for those drivers that operate a CMV that does require a CDL license, they must provide an additional 7 years of pre-employment history in addition to the 3 years. And then each application must include this certification and signature line that the driver signs and dates. One thing that you can do if you want to ask additional information as it relates to the applicant's experience with your specific job or industry, you can certainly do so. DOT does not limit you from doing that. This information here also must be communicated to the driver. One thing that I recommend is including this information right in the employment application above the signature line. Okay, the driver has completed the application. Now you want to proceed to the next step and you investigate the previous employers. So we find that this is a common area of non-compliance, partly because it can be a very time-consuming and laborious task. If you think about it, if a driver's had 10 previous employers in that prior 3-year history, you have to do the investigation with each 10 of those employers. So One thing that you want to ensure is that part of the forms that they fill out at time of application are the previous employment verification forms. You need one of these forms completed for each of the previous employers. Regulation states that you must make good faith efforts to obtain the investigation data, and it must be placed in the driver qualification files within 30 days of the driver's date of employment. What I recommend is you make at least 2 attempts to meet the good faith effort requirement. Now, these investigations can consist of personal interviews, telephone interviews, letters, faxes, whatever method you want to use. The only thing that I encourage you to do here is properly document each attempt that you make to contact the previous employer. So whether it be a fax cover receipt, a copy of a postmarked envelope, if it's via phone, that you record the date, time, and who you speak to. You just really need to make sure that you document things very well when it comes to previous employment verifications. Here's the information that must be included in the PEV itself. So the previous employer's name and address, the date the previous employer was contacted or the attempts were made, and the information received about the driver from the previous employer. So failures to contact a previous employer, or if they choose not to respond to your request, needs to be documented. Again, document, document, document when it comes to previous employment verifications. Now, there is an exception. For those drivers with no previous employment experience, or as an example, if you have a driver that takes a hiatus from driving for a period of 3 months to work in a restaurant, as an example, obviously that restaurant's not a DOT regulated employer. So in that case, you wouldn't send a previous employment verification notice to the restaurant. You would simply make a notation and document that you're the reason why you're not conducting a previous employment verification, and put that in the driver qualification file. Okay, as far as what information must be investigated, so verify the driver identity and employment dates, any DOT recordable accidents that they were involved with, copies of all accident reports required by any state or other governmental entities or insurers, whether the applicant was subject to drug and alcohol testing. So in other words, were they subject to operating vehicles that required a CDL license? Did they have any violations of the drug and alcohol program? And then if they were subject to a substance abuse program, you need to get documentation of that program itself. And then also verify that no subsequent positive tests after completion of the SAP took place. Okay, effective January of 2020, the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse became effective. And for those of you that are struggling with the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse as far as getting set up with that, that's something we can assist you with. If you're not familiar with the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse and you operate CDL drivers, I would urge you to act quickly on that, because that will definitely be a point of audit for DOT audits. So up until January 6th of 2023, you'll need to conduct the investigation both with the previous employer as well as run the query with the clearinghouse to verify the prior drug and alcohol testing information. After January 6th of 2023, then you will no longer have to perform the previous employment verification as it relates to the drug and alcohol piece. You'll strictly go through the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse to confirm that. Now, just like you sent your previous employment requests to the previous employers of applicants for your company, you will likely get similar requests for previous drivers, or even current drivers that are employed by you. You're responsible for completing and responding back to those requests within 30 days. So motor vehicle records. So there are 3 occurrences when motor vehicle records must be ran. So the pre-employment, and even though the regulation says that those can be done within 30 days after employment begins, our recommendation is that you run these prior to hiring. In my opinion, there's no sense in hiring a driver and then only to find out later that after you bring them on board and incur the expense and time that their MVR doesn't support your insurance carrier's criteria to provide coverage for that driver. Also, the annual review. So every 12 months, you have to run a MVR, and the driver has to complete a certificate of violations, and you compare the two and then perform an annual review, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And then the third occurrence is at time of medical, the renewal of the medical certificate for the driver with a CDL. So this has to be done within 15 days after a new medical certificate is obtained to ensure that the driver has self-certified that medical certificate with the state. Now, one alternative that you can do in lieu of running this MVR is enroll in a vendor-provided MVR monitoring system that would automatically notify you if the driver doesn't renew, their driver's license their CDL would be downgraded, and you'd get automatic notice of that. One thing that I will recommend is that you seriously consider looking at the MVR monitoring program. There's a lot of added benefits other than just saving the time and costs associated with this one MVR. It's a program that we offer that we can administer for you. If you want more information on that, certainly reach out to Mark or I, and we can gladly provide that. The medical certificate. You must have a legible copy of the medical certificate. So one thing here is watch for the intrastate only restriction. And then you need to verify through the National Registry of Certified Medical Examiners that the doctor or the physician that conducted the DOT physical is registered with that on that site. So a recommendation here is if you have a driver that has anything less than a standard 2-year medical certificate, that individual has some sort of medical condition that the doctor is restricting that medical certificate to less than 2 years. In those cases, I would suggest getting a legible copy of the long form physical and including that in your driver qualification file. That way you know what medical condition that individual has that's causing that restriction. Okay, every 12 months, as I mentioned earlier, the driver must submit a record of violations identifying any moving violations received in the preceding 12 months. And this has to be on a form that you provide them. So with that, the annual review, after receiving the notice of violations from the driver, you'll run an MVR, compare the two, and then complete the annual review document, making sure that that driver still meets all the qualification criteria established by the DOT. So a recommendation here is, since you have to submit the form, the certificate of violation form, combine these forms, the record of violations and the annual review, into one form. And then once the driver submits the record of violation portion, then run the MVR and then perform the annual review after that. Okay, a little bit about road test. So this is the regulation that describes when a road test is required and when it's not. So to simplify that, essentially, if the driver applicant has a CDL from a state that requires a road test to obtain a CDL, you aren't required to perform another road test on that individual, unless they're operating equipment that requires a tanker endorsement or a double and triple trailer endorsement. And then in those cases, you would be required to perform another road test. The other example would be non-CDL or drivers of non-CDL commercial motor vehicles. You have to perform the road test on those. Strong recommendation here. So regardless if your driver's CDL satisfies the road test requirement, I would highly recommend performing a road test to verify the applicant's ability to safely operate your equipment. So in my career, too often have I seen drivers possessing a CDL A license that could not safely operate a tractor trailer combination during a road test. So don't take for granted just because they have a CDL license that they know how to drive, especially back a combination vehicle. Okay, the road test shall be given by the motor carrier or a person designated by it. So the person providing the road test must be competent to evaluate the applicant's driving ability. The road test must be of sufficient duration. And the applicant must demonstrate a competency in safely completing each of the 8 activities below. Okay, the form shown here must be completed, a copy given to the driver, and the original placed in the driver qualification file upon completion of the road test. Notice that the examiner also has to sign this to make it valid. Okay, as mentioned earlier, while a copy of the driver's license is not specifically required to be included in the driver qualification file, we strongly recommend including a legible copy of the front and back of the driver's license. Too often we do find examples though where photocopies are just not clear enough that you can't decipher what information is on the license. So I encourage you, before you put that copy in, make sure that you can read the information. Also pay special attention to endorsements and restrictions on the license. Okay, so you've hired a driver, they're getting ready to start working for you. And one thing that you need to, and you're getting ready to put them on the road. So one thing that you need to ensure is that they have hours available that they can drive. Now, again, it's not required to be part of the driver qualification file, but again, I recommend that you include this, that you want to have them fill out the statement of on-duty hours where they provide you the hours worked for the prior 7 days, so that you can then determine whether or not you can immediately put them behind the wheel of your vehicle, or if they may be out of hours on the 60 or 70 hour rule. Okay, according to Part 390.3 of the regulations, every motor carrier is responsible to ensure that their employees understand the regulations. So providing them a copy of the pocketbook, handbook of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations that you can obtain through J.J. Keller is a good step in this direction. You can buy these for I think they're like $3 or $4 a piece. And make sure that you complete this. As you notice, the supervisor or carrier representative signature has to be on this. This is the inside front cover of the book. Tear it out, put that in the driver qualification file to document that you provided this to the driver, that they have the ability to research any and all regulations associated with driving that vehicle. One thing I want to stress here is, as the FMCSRs are updated, make sure that you purchase updated handbooks and issue new ones, and put a new copy of the updated receipt in the driver qualification file. You'll see that right below where it says supervisor carrier representative signature, you see the 9/20. That's the version date that it was updated. All right, so establishing a driver qualification file is really only the first step to success. You really need a system in place that ensures that you'll be able to monitor the expiration dates and also communicate renewal notices to your drivers. So as those renewal dates relate to driver's licenses, medical certificates, and then on an annual basis, the certificate of violations, the annual MVR, and also the annual review. All right. So with that, we'll open it up to Q&A.
So Brett, these questions came in advance, so you might have covered them with what we just went through, but out of respect to those that sent them in, I'm going to ask them anyway. So the first one is, who is required to have a DQF?
Okay. Yeah, this is one thing that I had mentioned earlier in the presentation, but this is where it gets a little confusing for some carriers, is that they associate the driver qualification file with the CDL. And really it's, it can be non-CDL and CDL drivers. So if you think of it this way, that any driver of a vehicle greater than 10,000 pounds. So if you're in the world of like the Ford F-Series pickups, so an F-250 pickup, so a 3/4 ton pickup, is typically under 10,000 pounds. But if they couple that with a trailer, now you're over 10,000 pounds gross combination weight. An F-350 is typically 13,000 pounds gross vehicle weight rating. So those vehicles would be considered a commercial motor vehicle in interstate commerce. Or any vehicle, let's say you have an F-150 pickup that you're hauling placarded hazardous material in, then that would be subject to a CDL license, as well as driver qualification files, hours of service, maintenance records, all the above.
Gotcha. So keeping with the promise of confidentiality to anybody that submitted questions in advance, I'd ask that individual, if you're good with that response and you're all set, great. If you would like to do a deeper dive, feel free to reach out to me. Same avenue you sent the question in, and we'll get back to you with more details if you need it. Second one we got is, we've done an audit for the DQF, and now we find we have something missing. What do we do?
Good question. So in this case, one thing that you want to do is obviously do your best to correct that deficiency. Now, there may be some cases where you're finding this information out. As an example, that driver's been employed with you for longer than 3 years, and you're just finding out now that you failed to do a previous employment verification. Well, if you have a driver fill out a form and submit it in that's beyond the 3 years, more than likely that previous employer is not going to respond to it because it's beyond the 3-year time frame. So in those cases, just document the fact that you've identified this, the date you identified it, and that's pretty much all you can do. You don't want to falsify a record, make up that you attempted to contact them prior to you finding it out or anything like that. DOT realizes that and can appreciate the fact that there may be things that you miss. The best thing to do is just document it, be upfront, and be able to explain it if you go through a DOT audit.
Gotcha. Okay. Same format and rule as, if that didn't adequately give you the details you're looking for, let me know. The next one we got, I found interesting in this world we live in of driver retention issues and challenges. And the question is what if I have an employee, a driver, leave our organization and then we rehire them back? Am I all set, or what do I have to do?
Another great question. This comes up a lot. And so there's 2 ways to answer this. So first, if the driver is rehired within 30 days of termination, you can reactivate their driver qualification file. So you don't have to do anything other than that. If it's beyond 30 days, then you have to create a new driver qualification file. Now, there are certain documents that you can use, like the road test and medical card, if they're still valid, in the new file. But the application, the MVR, all that, you have to run get new documents on those.
Okay. And again, same process. If that answered it, great. If you need more details, let me know. I got two more, and then we'll be done with the webinar unless anybody on the line has any other questions. They're welcome to go to the Q&A button at the bottom. You can keep confidential and just ask Brett directly, and the rest of the team that's online, all the other participants wouldn't be able to see the question. If not, if you're not comfortable doing that and you've got a question, feel free to shoot them in to me. Otherwise, I've just got two left, and then we've got a quick wrap up, and then we'll be good to go. Next one is a little, well, it's not a little, it's a lot over my pay grade. And it's, if I have a driver that has a valid driver license from his or her home state, but the driving privileges is suspended or revoked in another state, does that disqualify them from driving for us?
The simple answer is yes. So the driver would be disqualified from interstate operations until his or her privileges are restored by the operating authority or the authority that suspended or revoked them, provided the suspension resulted from a driving violation. Now, if the driver is operating strictly intrastate, then they would continue to be able to operate on an intrastate only basis, assuming again that their license is still valid in the state of issuance, being that state of intrastate travel.
Okay, great. And then the last question, and full disclosure, this one I found on the internet. This one wasn't sent in, but it's one that, with the Bruce Springsteen issue and the response of and the ending of that, I thought I would ask the following on behalf. Just my driver came in this morning, told me he was stopped over the weekend and received a DUI. What do I do now?
Another good question, and this has come up several times in my career. So one thing you have to take a look at is, did the DUI happen in his personal vehicle or a commercial motor vehicle? If it happened in the commercial motor vehicle, then they're obviously disqualified to drive any commercial motor vehicle as part of 391.15. If it was in his personal vehicle, then you have to determine whether or not the authorities confiscated his driver's license. If not, and he should be able to still drive for you. Now, I say should, I would request copies of all documentation. I would certainly instruct that individual that when he goes to court, that you need to know immediately upon the outcome of that court case what the final determination was. I would also, as best practice, reach out to your insurance carrier, advise them of the situation, and seek their guidance to make sure that, one, they'll still provide coverage in the event that individual is involved in an accident with this pending DUI case hanging out there.
Okay. Thank you. And we just got a question came in online. Could this be available after the session? And here's where we'll get into the wrap up unless any other questions come in. I'm assuming you're asking if the slide deck is available after the session, and the answer is yes. I'm going to send this entire slide deck to everybody that registered for the webinar. That'll go out to everyone no later than tomorrow morning. And then if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you're welcome to to reach out to Brett or myself. Our contact information you can see is on the last slide. We also recorded this. So if you want Brett's voice or mine, you're welcome to get a link to the recording. That I don't ram down anybody's throat. So if you would like that, I just ask you to shoot me a note, and then I'll provide you the recorded session of this webinar. Otherwise, again, slide deck will be to you no later than tomorrow morning. We had a couple of people ask for the hours of service webinar slide deck that we did last month, and I responded to those individuals while Brett was going through the slides that I'll shoot that out this afternoon. So those you'll get this afternoon. Anybody else wants that, again, just let me know, and I'll shoot you the hours of service slide deck from last month along with ELD monitoring requirements. So with that, I would just real briefly like to say thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate your time again. I'm very respectful and understanding that the one thing we can never get back is our time, and you making this commitment today is a big process on your part, and I'm grateful for that. I would also like to, and I just got another note that somebody would like the slide deck. I'll make sure I get that over to you also. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Brett. He's going to share next month's webinar, if you found this helpful and insightful for you and your organization, what our topic is next month. We have an annual marketing plan. We're committed to try to add value to you and the other folks that are out there in the field doing what you do every day for us. We're trying to give back in whatever little way we can by having one webinar every month. And next month's webinar is, Brett?
Yeah, it's Mark. It's going to be on March 25th, and we're going to provide an in-depth overview of the importance of monitoring your CSA data and your FMCSA portal. And I also would like to mention that if you have a specific topic that you would like to see us cover in these monthly webinars, feel free to shoot Mark or I an email on that, and we will tailor a presentation to address that. And as Mark mentioned, again, thank you for your time. I know it's valuable, and we certainly appreciate your attendance today and the questions that we received.
With that, we're done a little bit early, so thank you again very much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Those of you that have asked for last month's or the video version, I believe I have your contact information, and my commitment is you'll have it no later than tomorrow morning, if not this afternoon, especially for last month's slide deck. If you do not get that information you asked for whatever reason, I hit leave the meeting and you had just sent a request, I'm not ignoring you. Just ping me back. You've got my email right there. Let me know, and I'll get it to you just ASAP, okay? So again, thank you very much. Have a great rest of the afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.